I'm recording my homily for the 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. And once again, I'm on vacation, so I wasn't in the parish. This is basically the last day of my vacation, but I decided to take a little day trip up. So this is the North Cascades Highway. This is Highway, I forget the number 20, I think. Highway 20 or Highway 2? Highway 20, I think. Anyways, so this is kind of right where it goes. I'm right on the edge, so I get a little vertigo here. It goes down into eastern Washington from here down to Winthrop. Very, very beautiful place. Yesterday I actually did have Mass with some people. It was actually a camp, and there was a bunch of families there. And there was about 75 people there, and it was a beautiful, beautiful opportunity to be with Catholics and celebrate Mass with them. And I was talking to them, kind of tying it into the reading. So in the Gospel this weekend, you have Jesus getting exasperated with the Pharisees because they're very concerned about their traditions, specifically the washing of hands before they eat. Well, we all know that's just good hygiene, right? But it was more than that for them, and so they're upset with Jesus' disciples because they're not observing some of those traditions, like washing their hands or doing a few other things. And as you know, in the Gospels, Jesus often gets ridiculed for not observing the Sabbath, which just in that is you can only walk a certain distance on the Sabbath, and then you violate the day of rest, right? And so they often felt like Jesus was violating the work requirements on the Sabbath, or the minimum not to be working on the Sabbath. So anyways, so that's how the Gospel starts out today, is they're ridiculing his disciples for not washing their hands. Well, I was at the camp and I asked the parents, I said, okay, parents, how many of you, while you've been camping here, can honestly say your kids have washed their hands every time they ate while camping? Well, none of them could, because when you go camping, you start breaking some of the rules, right? I mean, you just kind of have to. You can't observe the same cleanliness rules that you normally have in the house, because when you're camping, you don't have all those things. You might not have running water, et cetera, you know, or a toilet, right? So you make certain provisions for that, and you kind of break some of those rules. But there's a difference between those rules and the other rules, right? And so I was in the camp, I was talking to the kids, and I said, okay, so you get to break some of the rules, right? When you go camping, you get to stay up later, you eat kind of some junk food, right? Or you get to play with fire. Okay, the kids mentioned that one. You know, so that's like, okay. But then I asked them, so do you get to break other rules? Like, do you get to steal now? Because before you can't steal. Stealing was bad. Or do you get to use bad words, right? And they're like, oh, I don't think so. Because there's other things that we know that no matter what the circumstances are, it's never good, right? And so there's a drastic difference between the rules of etiquette or hygiene and the rules of morality. And so Jesus really gets on them about that today. And he talks to them, and he says at the very end, he says, what you have to be mindful of is not what's on the outside, but what comes from within. So for example, he says, because from within, from people's hearts come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery. You know, there's that expression, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. I think that's the expression. In other words, people go to Las Vegas to sin, right? They go there, they think for some reason that Las Vegas is a good place to go if you want to sin. Well, why is that? Well, because they're going away from their home so they can keep it a secret. And so whatever happens there stays there. And unfortunately, our secrets fly home with us, don't they? So that's not legitimate. That's Pharisaical in a sense, because they're forgetting that weightier things, that these things are always wrong. Greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, all these things are always bad. They're always bad. And so Jesus is trying to get at that. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I want to talk about something that I think, well, something that's come to me just in thinking about this whole mess in the church with how we've handled priests who are pedophiles, or priests who are abusing, whether it's kids or even adults, abusing their authority over them by having sexual relations with them, whatever the circumstances were. And then we began to hide it, right? Whatever happens in Las Vegas stays on. We began to hide it. And we were all worried about the church, but we weren't worried about the victims. And so what happens is we forgot the weightier things. We forgot that which is most important. So I was reading a letter that Archbishop Sample, for the Archbishop of Portland, wrote on this. You can find it on the Archdiocesan website for Portland, Oregon. And it's a good letter, but at first I was a little upset with it. And if there's anybody reading this from Portland, bear with me, right? Okay. So I was a little upset because he kept talking about holiness, that the cure, if you will, or the cure for all of this is holiness, that what we need is holiness. I was a little upset because I wasn't quite ready for that. What I was frustrated with, or what I was looking for, I suppose, was someone from that level of authority, from the bishop, saying, what we need is accountability. What we need is to hold all of the bishops accountable who have moved priests who sexually abused children, who moved them from parish to parish, and the bishops who didn't listen to the victims, the bishops who in fact tried to castigate the victims, make them look like it was their fault. You know, those types of things. That's what I was looking for. Now, he does go into that a little bit. So I had to pray about it a little bit. But in the end, the Archbishop is right. Holiness really and truly is the cure. And not only that, but because we abandon holiness, that is the reason. That is the reason that we're in the mess that we're in. At some point, individuals made decisions to abandon the weightier things, to abandon the law of God in favor of preserving, if you will, the good name of the church here on earth, or whatever have you. And so to keep the secrets rather than to bring it out into the open. And And so holiness really is that which we need. Now, just another thing on this, it reminds me, if somebody were to say, okay, what's the cause of all this? Okay, so we lost holiness, but what happened? What happened? I want to offer a thought, just a thought. This is not to explain it all right? But just a thought on this. So in the 1960s and the 1970s, now we can even go back before that. You can go back to the 1910s and the 1920s, because already birth control was they were just starting to accept birth control as a legitimate thing in our culture, and even the different religions were starting to accept it. But in the 1960s and 1970s, the sexual revolution was really in full steam. The problem is that the Catholic Church wasn't ready. It was like an army caught off guard. It was like soldiers caught off guard. It's like they were caught while they were sleeping. And we weren't ready to address this issue with the world. We didn't have an answer for them. Yes, we could listen to Jesus, and Jesus has the answer, but it was almost like we were ashamed of that answer, to pay attention to the weightier things, that adultery and licentiousness and unchastity, all these things that are very, very much against the sexual revolution, speak volumes, but we didn't know how. I would say we didn't know what to say. And perhaps it's because we were actually believing the culture. Maybe we really deep down had abandoned the teachings, but everything had been just kind of flowing along. But then when the world changed, the sexual revolution, then all of a sudden we had to wake up, and we weren't ready. And so the church basically, in many ways, faltered. This was the time when many religious sisters left their orders, many priests left the priesthood. And many lay people just stopped engaging faith, seeing it as being irrelevant. Well, why? Because they were now accepting things like adultery or just living together or birth control, abortion, all these things that the world now says are good. And we were silent. We didn't have an answer to. So Pope John Paul II, who I think he was the first of the highest level of authority to come out and say, look, people, we have a language to speak here to our people. We have a language that speaks to this illness. We can proclaim the gospel in such a way in modern terms that still speaks to the heart of the people. And he brought it out little by little in his theology of the body discourses and his Wednesday audiences. And so over the course of several years, he gave us a language to use, that the human person is beautiful in the context of true love, first with our Lord and then with our neighbor. But it's only in that we will find, it's only in that holiness, it's only in that authenticity of living that we will have a language that we could speak to the world. Otherwise, we'll just be silent. I was telling the people at the camp, the families at the camp, it says, there's nothing more frustrating than preaching on an issue when you know 80% of Catholics have already abandoned the church on that issue. That's birth control, right? And I know there's a lot of people who say, oh, why doesn't the church just get over it? Well, we can't. That would be like somebody saying, Jesus, well, come on, why don't you just get over this whole adultery thing or this whole licentiousness thing or this whole, stealing thing. It's like, come on, let's just, stealing's not that bad. It doesn't make any sense. We can't do that. And so we have a language. We have the cure, right? So I think for each and every one of us to say, do I believe in it? Do I believe in proclaiming today this message to the world, not because I hate the world or because I think the world is evil, but because I love my neighbor, because I love God and I love my neighbor, and I want to proclaim the beauty of that truth. And so the Pharisees during their time had forgotten that. That's what they had forgotten. They were not holy because they had forgotten that which is essential from God. Instead, they started teaching their own human traditions, and that's why Jesus got so upset. And so today we're doing the same thing. We have our own human traditions or cultural norms, but they're erroneous and they lead us astray. Alrighty. I hope you have a wonderful week. God bless. Take care.